In this video, I'd like to introduce some of the key elements in Michael Tippett's oratorio A Child of Our Time and set the work in some sort of historical context. It's not an easy piece, and Tippett, like many composers of his generation, is uncompromising in the way he presents his artistic vision to the public. He never condescends, patronises or sugarcoats. He has an unwavering faith that his audience will have the capacity to understand the complexities and paradoxes, both musical and conceptual, that he presents to them. Born in 1905, Michael Tippett was a contemporary of Benjamin Britten and William Walton, and like them forged his style against the backdrop of the years prior to and during the Second World War. These three musicians, probably the most significant British composers of their generation, shared similarities of style. All delighted in dissonant harmonies and often angular melodies. All drew upon jazz influences from time to time and incorporated them into their work. All three were clever and economical orchestrators, turning their backs, to some extent, on the lush, rich orchestrations of the turn of the century. Walton's politics tended towards the right wing, even casually anti-Semitic in the years before the war, but Britten and Tippett shared a left-wing pacifist stance. Both registered as conscientious objectors, and Britten was granted this status without qualification. Tippett, on the other hand, did not receive an absolute exemption from war service and was ordered to work full-time on a farm. This he refused to do, and as a result spent 3 months imprisoned at Wormwood Scrubs. Ralph Vaughan Williams was one of the witnesses to testify in his defence, describing his work as a national asset. Tippett carefully listed his time in the prison in his yearly Who's Who entry. In this interview with John Donne, recorded in 1984, Tippett discusses his time in Wormwood Scrubs as a conscientious objector.
There were a lot of them there, a lot of conches, when we had a workshop to ourselves because we didn't do war work. But I was by far the oldest there. I should think they're all young ones, and boring, but in other words interesting, because it really is a very curious society. You're blocked right away, and in a way I belonged. I felt the first night I was there I'd come home.
Come home?
Yes. I belonged with the outcasts of humanity. This was part of A Child of Our Time. Yeah. Part of that side of me which, I don't know, feels that way. It isn't, of course, utterly true. It couldn't presumably be true, but unless you have some feeling of that side of humanity, to my mind, you can't write the things I want to write. You have to have some compassion and understanding.
A Child of Our Time was composed between 1939 and 1941 and received its premiere in 1944. Its subject matter is, in many ways, wide-ranging, but it focuses on the true story of a young Jewish man, Herschel Greenspan. Greenspan was born and educated in Hanover until 1935, when at the age of 14 he left his primary school because Jewish students were being discriminated against. After a brief period in Frankfurt, his parents sent him to live with his aunt and uncle in Paris. In October of 1938, Greenspan's parents, still in Germany, were arrested by the Gestapo as part of a forced deportation program and had all their property stripped from them. The Greenspans found themselves trapped at the German-Polish border when Polish authorities refused to admit the refugees. Berta, Herschel's sister, sent a postcard to Paris asking her brother to arrange passage to America, something that, as an illegal immigrant, he was utterly unable to do. On the morning of the 7th of November 1938, the frustrated and disenfranchised Greenspan wrote a farewell postcard to his parents and walked to a local gun shop, where he purchased a handgun and 25 rounds of ammunition. At 9:45, he entered the German embassy and asked to see an official. He was admitted to the office of a junior diplomat, Ernst von Rath. Upon entering, Greenspan shot von Rath 3 times in the stomach. According to the account of a French policeman, Greenspan shouted that he was acting in the name of 12,000 Jews. 3 days later, the German mob used the event as a pretext for Kristallnacht, in which over 90 Jews were killed, 30,000 were arrested, and more than 200 synagogues wrecked or burned. Michael Tippett's oratorio is far more than a simple documentary, although it does walk us through some of the key events in Greenspan's story. It is dramatic in the sense that different soloists and the choir itself take on different roles. The bass soloist acts as a narrator, but only in a very few short passages does he give a literal account of the story. The chorus most often speaks for the masses, and the tenor soloist tends to represent the persecuted individual, Greenspan and those like him. The soprano soloist gives voice to Greenspan's mother. Rather than giving a detailed documentary description of the events themselves, the text, written by the composer himself, addresses the human conditions surrounding the events. The oratorio concerns itself with the general human conditions of persecution, brutality, alienation and violence, and also the conditions of resilience, compassion and nurturing, and deliberately avoids describing the specific circumstances of Greenspan, his family and von Rath. It even avoids reference to specific nations or groups of people, preferring instead to speak of the universal. So the roles of the singers, soloists and chorus are not operatic, and nobody stays in character throughout the work, although it is possible to identify traits. In dramatic terms, Tippett presents us with tension but little resolution, at a superficial narrative level at any rate. What's more, we, with the chorus, abhor Greenspan's predicament, and that of his family, but the libretto resolutely refuses to present us with someone specific to blame. The forces of oppression in this work are dark, malevolent and powerful, but unnamed. Listen to Tippett's quiet, brief description of the pivotal moment in Greenspan's story, when he shoots von Rath, sung by the bass and alto soloists.